Grandmaster smirked as he invited Dolly, the cleaning lady, to play chess, expecting a quick laugh for the wealthy crowd at the upscale Manhattan Chess Club. He figured it'd be easy entertainment, a chance to flex his superiority. But what unfolded didn't just hush the room. It flipped his world upside down, challenging everything he thought he knew about skill, respect, and the heart of the game. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above the polished marble floors as Dolly quietly wiped down each chess piece on the fancy boards. The exclusive club buzzed with its usual evening vibe, rich folks sipping overpriced wine, tossing around big talk about strategy, their voices dripping with the kind of arrogance only deep pockets can buy. For 3 years, Dolly had been invisible here. She'd watched these high rollers treat chess like a status symbol, flashing their ratings and club memberships like designer watches. They'd name-drop famous players they'd brushed shoulders with, boast about pricey coaches, and sneer at anyone who didn't fit their elite clique. "Careful with that board, it's worth more than you make in a month," one member had scoffed once. Dolly just nodded and kept cleaning, but deep down she knew chess wasn't about the cost of the pieces. She'd fallen in love with the game in her grandma's cramped Brooklyn apartment, playing on a cheap plastic set from the bodega. Her grandma taught her chess was about brains, not bank accounts, strategy, patience, and respecting your opponent. But this place, it twisted her beloved game into something shallow and snobby. That's why Dolly took this job. Day after day, she watched these people mock everything she cherished about chess. They'd dissect games they barely grasped, trash talk moves by players way out of their league, and worst of all, act like only their kind deserved a seat at the board. The Grandmaster, Victor Langston, leaned back in his leather chair, a smug grin spreading across his face as he gestured toward the board. "Come on, Dolly," he said, his voice loud enough to draw chuckles from the crowd of tailored suits and glittering jewelry. "Let's see what you've got. One game for fun." The room leaned in, eager for the spectacle, a world-class player schooling the help. Dolly set down her cleaning rag, her expression calm, almost unreadable. She walked over, her worn sneakers silent on the marble, and sat across from him. The crowd whispered, some smirking, others raising their wine glasses in mock anticipation. Victor expected a slaughter. He was a Grandmaster, after all, rated 2,700, a regular at international tournaments, his name etched on plaques in this very club. Dolly, she was nobody, a woman who scrubbed floors and polished their precious boards. He figured he'd toy with her, maybe let her make a few moves before checkmating her in 10. The audience would love it, a quick ego boost for everyone who belonged here. Dolly moved first, sliding her king's pawn forward 2 squares. Standard, predictable. Victor responded with a casual Sicilian defense, already planning his victory speech. But then Dolly's next move came, a knight to f3, precise and unfussy. Victor raised an eyebrow, still smirking, and countered. The game rolled on, and the room's chatter faded as Dolly's moves grew sharper, each one calculated, cutting off Victor's usual tricks. By move 15, his grin was gone. She wasn't floundering, she wasn't even hesitating. Every piece she placed seemed to tighten a noose around his position. Victor leaned forward, sweat beading on his forehead. The crowd noticed it too. The Grandmaster was struggling. Dolly's eyes stayed locked on the board, her hands steady, no trace of nerves. She wasn't playing like a beginner or even an amateur. Her strategy was deep, layered, like she'd seen every trap Victor set before he even thought of it. A murmur rippled through the room when she sacrificed a bishop, a move so bold it left half the spectators confused and the other half stunned. Victor took the bait, only to realize 3 moves later he'd walked into a devastating pin. The game ended in 32 moves. Checkmate. Dolly's queen and rook cornered Victor's king. No escape. The room was dead silent, the clink of wine glasses forgotten. Victor stared at the board, his face pale, then at Dolly, who simply stood and picked up her cleaning rag. "Thanks for the game," she said softly, her Brooklyn accent steady, and walked back to the tables she'd been wiping down. The crowd erupted into whispers as Victor sat frozen. He'd been outplayed not by some prodigy or rival master, but by the woman they'd all ignored for years. Dolly, who'd learned chess on a wobbly kitchen table, who'd studied grainy library books and played against her grandma's ruthless Sicilian openings, had just dismantled a Grandmaster in front of his own audience. As she cleaned, Dolly overheard the murmurs. Some called it a fluke. Others demanded to know where she'd learned to play like that. One older member, a retired financier, approached her. "Who taught you?" he asked, his tone more curious than condescending. Dolly shrugged. "My grandma. She said chess doesn't care who you are, only how you think." The man nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Victor, still at the board, replayed the game in his head. He'd underestimated her, sure, but it was more than that. Dolly hadn't just beaten him. She'd exposed the hollowness of his world, where titles and wealth meant more than the game itself. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of humility, and with it a spark of something he hadn't felt since he was a kid, the pure, raw love of chess. Dolly finished her shift and slipped out into the chilly New York night, her breath visible under the streetlights. She didn't need their applause or their validation. She'd played for herself, for her grandma, for the game. Back at the club, the chatter resumed, but it was different now, less smug, less certain, and Victor, still staring at the board, knew he'd never look at chess or anyone the same way again. The next evening, the chess club felt different. The usual swagger of the patrons was muted, their conversations less brash, as if Dolly's victory had left a lingering crack in their polished world. Victor Langston arrived early, his usual entourage absent. He sat at the same board from the night before, staring at the pieces like they held some secret he'd missed. He hadn't slept much, replaying every move of the game in his mind, dissecting where he'd gone wrong. It wasn't just Dolly's skill that haunted him. It was her quiet confidence, the way she'd played without ego, like the game was all that mattered. Dolly arrived for her shift, her cleaning cart rattling softly as she moved through the room. The regulars stole glances at her, some with curiosity, others with unease. A few whispered theories about her past. Maybe she was a prodigy who'd fallen off the radar, or a hustler who'd conned her way into the job to scope out the club. None of them approached her, though. They didn't know how. She was still the help, after all, but now she was something else, too. A puzzle they couldn't solve. Victor caught her eye as she passed his table. "Dolly," he said, his voice quieter than the night before, stripped of its usual bravado. "Play me again." The room stilled, heads turning. Dolly paused, her hand resting on the cart. For a moment, she considered saying no. She didn't owe him anything, and she wasn't here to be their circus act. But something in Victor's face stopped her. It wasn't arrogance this time. It was need, like he was chasing something he'd lost. She sat down, and the crowd gathered, though they kept their distance as if afraid to break the spell. This time, Victor didn't play casually. He opened with a Ruy Lopez, a classic, testing her. Dolly responded with a measured defense, her moves deliberate but never slow. The game stretched longer than the last, each player probing, feinting, building intricate structures on the board. Victor was focused, his brow furrowed, but Dolly remained unreadable, her eyes flicking across the pieces like she saw 3 moves ahead. By move 20, the room was silent again, the air thick with tension. Victor had the upper hand, or so he thought. Dolly's position looked shaky, her king exposed, but then she slid a rook across the board, a move so subtle it seemed innocuous until it locked Victor's bishop in a trap. The crowd gasped softly. Victor's hands hovered, then froze. He saw it now, the checkmate coming in 5 moves, unavoidable. He tipped his king, conceding. "Well played," he said, his voice low but genuine. The crowd didn't know what to do. There was no applause, no chatter, just a heavy quiet. Dolly stood, gave a small nod, and returned to her cart. Victor watched her go, his mind racing. He'd spent years chasing titles, sponsorships, and the admiration of rooms like this one. But Dolly, she played for something else, something purer. It made him question every trophy on his shelf. Word of Dolly's games spread beyond the club. By the next week, a local chess blog had picked up the story, dubbing her the Brooklyn Checkmate. A few reporters showed up, sniffing around for an interview, but Dolly brushed them off. She didn't want fame. She just wanted to clean, go home, and maybe play a game on her grandma's old board. But the club's dynamic had shifted. Members started greeting her, some awkwardly asking about her strategies or offering to play, she declined most, politely but firmly, knowing they still saw her as a curiosity more than an equal. In a game where every move matters, Dolly showed the world that the heart of chess isn't in the price of the pieces or the name on the board. It's in the mind, the strategy, and the respect you bring to the table. She didn't just win a game, she reminded us all what it means to play for love.